and thank you for joining us for English Club TV. Today, our guest is Dr. Rick Diaz,
English professor.
history professor
That's right.
at Northern
History
State University.
professor.
I'm Holly Holborn,
And I'm Ashley Jenkins. Okay, our first question is, how did you choose to become a history professor as opposed to English?
Yeah, as opposed to English. I only had two choices in life. It was a binary decision. I could either be, in my life, an English professor or a history professor. That was a very difficult choice. Actually, the answer is, when I was a kid, when I was middle school, high school, I love school, which is, it's probably going to amaze you too, but I was quite a geek when I was younger. I know it's really quite a stretch of the imagination. I was the first kid at school every day. I was the last one to leave. I'm clean erasers. I'm surprised I wasn't beaten every day. So amazingly, I wasn't. I loved school, and of all the subjects that I loved, and that'd be all of them, I loved history the most. So that was easy for me to pick just a discipline. But then somewhere in high school, and I can't tell you where, one of those evil counselors said to me, Rick, you'd make a great psychologist. Really? I said. Really? Yes. You should be a counselor, Rick, in psychology. Okay. So the older boys maybe do it. That's one of my frequent kind of comebacks anyway to charges. And so I, rather than choose history as a major first in college, I chose psychology, thinking I would get some kind of graduate degree and become some kind of counselor. And then pretty early in my undergraduate years, I said, this isn't working the way I thought it would. And I wasn't enjoying college, I think, as much as I could have and felt like I should have. And so I made the switch to history. And then my freshman year, I already determined I really loved college. I just needed to pick the right major. And so I quickly determined that I needed to find a way that I could continue to go to college and get paid for it.
Okay.
And this made sense to me that I could become a college professor. I could stay in college forever.
Forever.
And then make the medium. I want the big money, but I'll make the medium money anyway, and that's great. So it was a combination of things that got me to history professorship.
Okay.
Yeah.
So now that we know why you became a history professor, as opposed to an English or a psychologist, what kind of connections do you see between history and literature? For example, you have The Coming of Age of Mississippi, or in Mississippi.
You've heard of that, have you?
Yeah, just one time.
That book was almost new when I started using it. I've been using it for over 20 years now. I've used it forever, and I think that this example of literature can really give people some insight. And I'm thinking back to the 3,000 or so students I've had while I've taught here at Northern. None of them were black and female, born in the South in 1940. Not one of them. Yeah, that's right. And so this piece of literature can get people who have nothing really, not much in common with this person, into her space and to appreciate her experience. And she can do it in a very palatable way. And you just actually finished the book, and I tell people it's not terrible. Is that true?
It was a good book. Very fast read. It was very nice to read it and not have to, it was a thinking book, but it wasn't this is very difficult to read.
Like as an English major, we're used to as English majors, we're used to okay, what does this book mean?
Yes. Right now we're reading Robinson Crusoe. And I'm as opposed to this is really nice. I just finished a chapter in 10 minutes. This is great.
Yeah.
So your assignments, you think, are fundamentally different between these two disciplines?
I think the objective is different.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're very, I, for one, think history and English are very very closely related.
Absolutely.
You can't have one without the other. So that's pretty much how I even came to being an English major, because I like both. And I was with English, you can't have English without history. So
you can still be a minor.
History without English.
You could both still be minors. In fact, I've got some paperwork on me here.
Actually, I'm 27 almost, so I can't be a minor anymore.
Yes, you can. We'll take the check as long as it clears. We can talk after the filming.
Okay, sounds good.
So this is kind of a subject switch.
Uh-oh.
But I am wondering what the heck the Electoral College is and how in the world it works.
This is a big shift, but so relevant, right? In fact, I just noticed in the newspaper, and I'm 56 years old, so I read a newspaper, because that's what old guys do. We read newspapers. So I was reading the newspaper today, and there was an op-ed from someone who's about my age, in fact. who called for the end of the Electoral College. And for as long as there's been an Electoral College, there's been calls to get rid of the Electoral College. Every few years you'll hear something. There's been hundreds of attempts. And I guess that Nancy Pelosi, who's minority leader, is now spearheading a new drive to get rid of the Electoral College. It's been around a long time. It'll take a change to the Constitution to do that, so it's going to be tough. So real briefly, actually electors are mentioned in the Constitution, sort of our set of instructions. The Electoral College is inferred from that. So you must have learned about it in middle school? When did you learn about the Electoral College?
I learned about it in middle school when we studied the Constitution,
okay,
but not like in depth. I didn't have any conscious ability to understand what it was. So
no. You grew up in Arizona?
Yes, and then I went to school. Arizona, California, Colorado, Arizona.
Oh yeah, okay. States of some size. I forget. You from North Dakota?
I'm from North Dakota, yeah.
No, this is interesting. Okay, so North Dakota should be a state that one might think would be more, I don't know, forgiving of the Electoral College, or more, maybe even supportive. Do you remember anything about learning about the Electoral College? Good thing, bad thing? Do you remember?
We just kind of went over objectively what it was.
Oh, okay. Well, the framers, in their infinite wisdom, to please states, smaller states, like the Dakotas. A SOP to them is the Electoral College, which gives, at least in theory, the voters more impact than they would if they were in a large state. So North Dakota and South Dakota are small states. They have the minimum number of representatives in Congress, right? They have
3 each, right?
3 each. So it's like Wyoming, North and South Dakota, stuff, the very small states, less than 1 million people in North and South Dakota each, right? Big states like, where's California? It's like 40 million people, I'm guessing. You have something like 55 electors, right? It's a lot bigger. But even though North and South Dakota are really small, they've got less than 1 million people, they still have 3 electoral votes. California has, let's say, 40 million people, but 55 electoral votes. So per voter, it really works out to the advantage in North and South Dakota to have this Electoral College, at least in theory anyway. So the idea was to get, when this country was formed and we got our second government under the Constitution, to get we didn't have North and South Dakota, we had like little states like Rhode Island. To get Rhode Island, right, which is the North Dakota of the time, on board. Here's a SOP for you guys. We will make your votes for president count for more through this Electoral College. How about that? Well, okay. Because they're thinking like we're going to be swamped by the big states like Pennsylvania and New York. This is something, a little something, something for small states. And so it is supposed to in part do that. It's supposed to sort of nationalize elections. I'm not sure it does, but that's the intent, right? And there's some other reasons behind it too. But I was kind of curious about, not to make this a quiz, but your education of the Electoral College, because it really is designed for small states more than big states. It's an odd system, though. Do you feel like you could carry on a conversation about it?
Well, I find it interesting what Nebraska and Maine do with the Electoral College and allowing their representatives to vote for different parties instead of the entire state voting the same way. And
they're the only two that split.
Right.
Yeah.
And I support that action
maybe.
Throughout all of
the
states.
Well, every once in a while, I think it's happened 5 times. The person with the popular vote majority didn't win the national election for president.
Once was quite recently with Bush and Gore.
Yes, as a matter, just hours ago it seems. But usually what supporters say is that, well, it helps out smaller states, it gives them more representation, and usually it accentuates differences in the popular vote. And I guess it did in this recent election, right? So if there's a very narrow popular vote difference, and it will like accentuate those differences so that it looks like the person who won by more, giving people what they call a mandate. Well, he's a legit, he or she's a legit winner. Look at how they just trounce the other person in the Electoral College. And it usually accentuates differences, like to give more legitimacy to the winner. And so, I have a suspicion that the Electoral College is probably less popular today than it has been in the past. It's not exactly what you'd call democratic. Does it seem unfair, perhaps? Or just weird?
What do you
I like what you said with like how some states do split it up.
Yeah.
Aren't there even some electors even that they don't necessarily have to go with the popular vote, like they can use their judgment?
It is a state-by-state thing. There's a
Right.
couple states that have like an oath. I don't know this thing inside and out, but it's rare. It's rare for an elector not to vote the way that their state votes. It's way over 90% of all electors follow the mandate of the people of their state. But it can happen, and it has happened, yeah.
It just seems like with today's technology, to be able to count all of the votes of the popular vote, it would make sense to consider those as a more democratic method.
It's clearly more democratic. One person, one vote. Well, what could be simpler than a popular vote? Either of you seem like you're convinced, like, oh yes, the North Dakotas and South Dakotas of America need to be protected by the Electoral College. That doesn't seem to animate either of you terribly.
I personally think that it's just North Dakota has the same opinion as much of the Midwest.
Yeah, that's true.
And in my respect, since my state did not vote the same way that I did, I feel like I would have more power with my vote if we didn't have the same system of all of the votes going towards the popular vote within the state.
Yeah, yeah. Well, we'll see what happens. Like I said, there are some new calls out there to make it go away. Once again, it would take a constitutional amendment. Oh, and that's almost an act of God to make happen. We've only done it a couple more than 2 dozen times. It's hard to pull off.
Yes.
Hard.
So we've been talking about the current election a little bit. So, in your opinion, what book should Donald Trump read, and also
on the Hall Scott
Hillary,
Motor Car Company? No, that wouldn't be a good call. How
and
about
also Hillary Clinton?
I think that Donald Trump, because he's not a politician, and that's part of his appeal, I think, to folks, perhaps not you, who voted for him, that he was not a politician, he's an outsider. Maybe he should read a book about a politician, an executive at that. He's going to be our chief executive. He's we've had some really, like maybe the best, I think if you were to poll historians, among the top vote-getting, sort of best presidents ever, it's going to be Abraham Lincoln. He was able to see the country through its greatest challenge, and he was a masterful use of the English. He's a wordsmith. He's gifted. He's our Bill, right? I guess the whole world has William Shakespeare. Well, we don't have William Shakespeare, but we do have Abraham Lincoln, who's superb. What a master of the language. His ability to read the tea leaves, to put together coalitions, know when to hold them and know when to fold them, that kind of Kenny Rogers kind of thing. He's just unsurpassed. And so some great books on Lincoln. You know what? David Donald had a book that came out called, strangely enough, Lincoln. Came out, and I remember it because it came out the year I was hired here in '95, and it's fantastic. David Donald has won a Pulitzer Prize, and it's terrific. This book, I think, is the best one-volume treatment on Lincoln, and it shows how this man dealt with power and thought about his position and delegated authority and thought about his responsibility, the big picture. It's all there. It's fantastic. I think it'd be instructive. Someone who's perhaps more like Donald Trump in temperament, he could read too. I mean, Donald Trump, I think, because he's an outsider, once again, is appealing to his supporters because he is that way. Maybe a book about someone who's more like him, like a book on Theodore Roosevelt, who actually had a career in politics before he came into the White House, and war, both the things Donald Trump does not. But his bull in China shop way of just charging through life, maybe to look and see how a person like that dealt with the constraints of being in a democracy and stuff like that. A good volume one would be Theodore Rex, that came out 5 years into my tenure here, by the great Edmund Morris, who's written a bunch of great books. The years that Roosevelt was in the White House. I think that would be instructive to Mr. Trump.
Okay.
I suppose. To see how two different people did it well, I'd say well. I like an active executive, so I think they did it well. But they have very different temperaments, and different outcomes. You know, another book that might work, because right now, I'm not sure if you follow News Bunch. Is that something you kind of keep up on? Well, right now, President-elect Trump is selecting folks around him, his cabinet and advisors and so forth. And so, who's he going to pick, right? Is he going to pick an outsider like me? You didn't vote for him. There's a call. Pick Holly Hallborn to be like, I'm not sure what you'd like to do in the White House. Trying to think what position would be.
Secretary of State.
Aim high. Swing for the fences. Oh, snap. Yeah, okay.
Homeland Security?
Sure, that'd be great.
I'm intimidating, right?
Yeah, so right now he's picking people, right? And so is he going to pick outsiders, insiders? He is an outsider. It's the year of the outsider. And so he's floating some names out there, folks that he wants to have around him. And there was a book that came out, Team of Rivals. Now, it was about Abraham Lincoln and the people he assembled around him. And they were all people who hated him, who thought he was an idiot and was unfit for the office and was incapable. They called him all sorts of terrible things behind his back. And he kept all the people who were his biggest challengers and rivals right next to him, which maybe Trump could do. I understand that right now Mr. Trump will be talking with Massachusetts Governor Mitt Romney soon. And Romney had some terrible things to say about Mr. Trump in the election. Will he pick this rival and put him real close to him? I don't know. It's a way of governing, right? Keep your friends close, but your enemies closer. That might be a good call. So maybe a Team of Rivals I'd give to him too. Say, hey, check that out. Here's what Lincoln did. Once again, a superb politician. Here's what Lincoln did.